We always thank our sponsors, Epson, Photo Shelter, Archive Magazine, Pro Photo Daily, American Photography. So this is our third night of the fourth week of doing covering the war with Ukraine and Russia. And we're thrilled that we've had great photojournalists. And tonight we have Heathcliff O'Malley, who's coming from us from England. We encourage everybody to go to our YouTube channel to see past performances, and tonight's performance will be up by Friday, we hope. And when you go there, you can subscribe to our channel. So Heathcliff, it is all yours, my friend. Thank you again.
Thank you. So do I go back to share screen now? Yeah.
Yes.
Apologies, because I don't use Zoom a lot. I'm quite new to this.
No, you're doing great.
So thank you for having me. I'm very flattered, and it's great to share work and talk about experiences and everything. I'm just going to start off with this first frame. It's just I originally came to Ukraine in 2014, and because I work for a newspaper, we used to rotate in and out. So I missed the main Maidan revolution in Kiev, and I was sent to Donetsk. And this is one of the first pictures I took back in 2014. And these are police outside the main government building in Donetsk. And I just thought I'd show it because it's so long ago now, and it just shows how long this has been going on. Within weeks, the government there had been overthrown, and you just think how much Ukraine has changed in that space of time. I mean, that's the thing when people say the Russian invasion. I mean, it happened back in 2014. It's been going on for that long now, and the Ukrainians have been suffering for that long with aggression from Russia. So I first came out in February of this year. I, like a few of us, didn't really think anything was going to happen. There was a lot of tension on the border, and so I thought I'd be going for a few weeks, and then things would die down, and I'd be going back home. And like a lot of others, so they started to train up the territorial defense. So they had lots of volunteers coming and training, and I was out at this disused asphalt factory on the outskirts of Kiev on the left bank, so on the other side of the Dnipro River. And at that point, it's still, they've got their wooden guns and stuff, and it all seemed a little bit silly. And I mean, who knows where these people are now? I mean, some of them might have lost their lives, sacrificed their lives fighting, defending the city. Okay. So what at one point sort of seemed like, isn't this crazy? It was for real, but I think a lot of us didn't really realize at that point how real it was. Days before the invasion, it was the anniversary of the Maidan Revolution, and this was a picture of families gathered where the faces of the Heavenly Hundred, as they're known, are displayed on a hill in the center of Kiev, and just a time for reflection, and just that other sense of how long this has been going on for, really. Right. So the morning of the invasion, I mean, for some reason I woke up about, I don't know, was it 5 a.m., something like that, and just picked up my phone. That sort of weird habit we all have nowadays of just picking up your phone when you probably shouldn't do. And I realized that Putin had announced this invasion, and so I just got out onto the street, and it was just this really eerie quiet. Nobody really seemed to know what was going on. and I went out with a couple of friends from our hotel and just walked around the center. And it was just quite bizarre, really. I mean, this police car was driving past, and the officer was using a traffic cone as a sort of hailer, so telling everyone to stay indoors. But it was just all a little bit surreal. So I mean, it's a bit of an odd picture, but it was an odd time, and it's very crazy. As the day went on, people just started to flood out of the city, and there was just traffic jams. And some of the journalists I knew were also doing the same thing. And so we're in the Radisson in the center of town, and people were just packing up and leaving. It's quite strange when your hotel starts to empty, and then you're like, oh, you're going too, and you kind of thought, well, where's anyone going to get to? We knew we were hearing lots of noise on social media. I mean, it's very confusing covering something like this with social media, because you're constantly getting these updates. The Russian special forces are in a government compound, and there are Russian armored vehicles, coming in this direction and that direction. And, it was getting a little bit chaotic.
So Heathcliff, with just a question, with the war now coming, so many of the photographers who were first coming to Ukraine were coming there to cover the war, but now when it's starting, they're running to safety like everybody else, because they don't know where.
I mean, there was an element of that, because I think people didn't really I thought that there would be a conflict on the border. I thought there would be a struggle for the Donbass, and maybe they would try and make a land bridge for Crimea. I don't think I expected them to attack Kiev. And then when they did, when the announcement came, I think because of our experience of shock and awe and Baghdad and everything, we kind of thought the same thing would happen. So it was strange because, we were talking about Ron earlier on. Before the war started, we were walking along the street one day and we were saying, just imagine if the people of Kiev have to take cover in metro stations. That would be like World War II. We just couldn't, getting your head around that idea that we'd be going back to the way we were in the 1940s again was quite a big deal. But for most of us, we just didn't expect. That was the extreme. It wasn't really, I'm sure some people were totally expecting it, but we weren't. So people had gone to the Donbass and down to Mariupol and places where they thought something might happen. No, Kiev wasn't really on the cards.
Right.
And once people realized that this is what was going on, and Russian columns could be seen crossing the border and heading towards Kiev, the people of the city just started to try and get out.
So now this scene that you have here, it's all rubble.
What, here?
Yeah.
What? No, it's not.
It's not.
I mean that's the bizarre thing. I'll come to that later. And these are some armored vehicles that came onto that same highway and started heading towards the advancing Russian troops. Who knows what happened to them? I mean, they all seemed fairly slick at the time, but who knows? So I was in Kiev for a few days, and the team I was with weren't that happy. Sorry, my things. Oops. I can't see the screen. It's disappeared. Can you share?
We're back to your grid now.
Yeah. Okay. Let me bring it back up again.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
No problem.
So I don't know what something's happened. Can you see it or no?
We
Yeah,
see the
Heathcliff,
grid.
let me end your share. That way you'll be able to see the screen again. Give me 1 second.
Sorry, do what? Sorry, stop the share.
I'm going to stop the share so you can see your screen again. There you go. You can
Okay.
share it again.
Okay, right. Sorry about this.
That's right. That's what happens with live TV.
Yeah. So I'm just going to have to just quickly cycle through. Okay, so I was in. So on day 3, the team felt it was the best thing to do was to pull back, and so we got in a vehicle, and somewhat reluctantly we headed west down a highway and ended up in Lviv, which is where a lot of refugees were starting to turn up. And this picture is just of families arriving at the train station, hoping to get out and get a train across to Poland. It was quite incredible, the amount of people that were turning up. It was bitterly cold, and just people from all walks of life. Lots of foreign students as well, which was sort of overlooked at the time, but there was a huge amount of people from developing countries who were in Ukraine to go to the universities there, who were trapped as well. And yeah, the train station, as you've probably seen with other people's pictures, I mean, there were some photographers who based themselves at train stations for weeks. I mean, there's just
Is that right?
a huge flow of people for weeks and weeks after the conflict started. It's really quite upsetting to see. I had a long conversation with an Australian Ukrainian woman who'd fled, and her apartment block had been hit, and she got out, and I did some video as well with her just on my iPhone. I used to do a bit of video before, and I did a little video thing with her as well. And afterwards, we just gave each other a hug. I think we kind of both needed it.
Yeah.
It was one of those. So yeah, just lots of people just packed into Lviv train station, hoping for somewhere to go. I mean, it's difficult to get your head around what it must be like when you've been living a life pretty much just like we are now, and it all just gets turned up on its end, and suddenly what you thought was your life is no more, and all you have is the bags you're carrying.
Yeah,
and you're having to leave your husbands behind, and if you're a mother of children, really, really difficult.
Yeah, so Heathcliff, 2 things. It's interesting you bring it up in that context, because one of the things that has come to my mind is that all these folks are leaving, and in a moment they're refugees.
Yeah.
When they were just they were citizens, they were countrymen of Ukraine, and now that word I never had such a visceral feeling towards how bad that word is. To be a refugee is really brutal. But I want to ask you a question. So someone covering the train station for weeks on end, that's got to be an incredible burden on your psyche, right? I mean, to just be there and just seeing desperate people leaving, over time, that has to wear on you as well, right?
Yeah, but it's tough. I mean, I spent a day, and that's enough.
Yeah.
And I've got some friends who work for the wire agencies who were covering the border crossing, and they would do a few weeks at a time, just covering just going up to the border each day, and it's important work, and like we were talking about before in the green room, this is the first time in a long time after, I first started in the Balkans in the late 90s, and I think for many years I started to feel a little bit like, it's important to record what's going on, but am I really making a difference? It didn't really feel like that. And I think that, with Ukraine, the media coverage really has made a difference. It's affected policy. I think governments have stepped up to support Ukraine, and I think the media has helped with that. It might be in a small way, but I definitely think it's helped. I think, when I look around at the amount of people I've met who have taken in Ukrainian families, I mean, if it wasn't for the media coverage, none of that would have happened. And, for my colleagues at the wire agencies that were, on the border for weeks at a time, those pictures coming in every day, on the websites, in the newspapers, on television, of all, there was a famous picture of a child coming over on their own. I mean, those kind of things really do affect people, and it's important. I was still in a bit of a daze after leaving Kiev, really, and wasn't happy I'd left, and was walking around the streets. It was pretty dark, and I came across this building in the center of town. I had no idea what was going on in there, but I could hear people singing. And this is a picture from the second day, but it turned out that there were just thousands of volunteers coming in and cutting up pieces of rags and making camouflage netting, to send out to the troops. And it was just incredible. They were, in this picture, they're all very, quite young, and they're all laughing, and they're all hanging out together, and just chipping in. But there were people from all sorts of ages, and it was the start of something special. It was the country coming together, and so many, even like fixers I've worked with, they've all done volunteering work, and it just seems like everyone you speak to, they've tried to do their bit. Some people end up on the front line, other people are on the home front, and they're all doing their bit for the war effort. And it was quite incredible to see, and especially when they were singing as well. I mean, the sound of these people singing whilst, it was really quite emotional. It was just very, really, really quite touching.
Yeah,
seeing these people.
We've seen images before of similar in that community coming together without any real organization, but it just comes together, and it happens. Preparing Molotov cocktails. Yeah. Right. I mean, just normal people, like these kids, just, and there's no hierarchy. It's just come on in, do this, and it just works. It's really amazing. This part of it. So I went back to the UK. It was a difficult decision, but ultimately, once I'd left Kiev, I've got a teenage child at home, and parents and everything. Everyone was freaking out. Once I pulled out and got to the relative safety of Lviv, the last thing I could do at that point, from my point of view, was say, "Oh, I'm going to go back in now." It was just, for me, it just felt like it was too much stress to put on my own family, because, everyone has their own thing they have to deal with. For me, ultimately, my main priority has got to be my child, so at that point I was like, well, I can't go back in. They're going to rotate a new team in now, so I'm going to go back to London, which is what I did. And I came back in early April. The Bucha story had just broke. There was a big wave of new interest, so they wanted to double up again with having 2 photographers in the country. And as I was entering
So this is on the main highway into Kiev. There were quite a few Russian tanks and armored vehicles, burnt out at the side of the road. And you kind of think they possibly could have started clearing stuff up at that point, but I think it was quite a good morale booster for people to see as they were driving back home, because there was a lot of traffic. I was quite overwhelmed at how many people at that point in early April were actually coming back in. I'd originally tried to take a train with a friend, but the trains had been stopped, and at that point we had no idea what was going on. But we found out the next day that the British Prime Minister had come in, so they just closed down the whole network. So we'd ended up hiring a car and driving in. And I just like this picture because, you got this guy on his scooter and he's, the novelty was still there for people. It was still a big deal seeing these Russian tanks burnt out at the side of the road. The war was still very fresh at that point for people in around Kiev, considering it had only just in the sort of 5-6 days prior sort of come out from that siege, and they pushed the Russians back. I then, because we had the team covering the whole Bucha side of the story, with the awful killings that had been going on there, with the Russian soldiers executing people and all sorts of other things, I went east of a journalist and we ended up in Kharkiv. And we hooked up with these volunteers that were bringing meals into the Saltivka area. And this train station, which is called Heroiv Pratsy, I think it is like the last stop on the line as you get to Saltivka, which was a neighborhood which was being really heavily shelled by the Russians. And it was, some of these people have been in there for, way over a month, just living on the platform with their families and sleeping in the trains. And really quite upsetting to see. Just really difficult to get your head around. And there was, I like this picture. It's just of a young girl. I've got her name somewhere here. That was Nina. So yeah, her name was Darina, and she was sitting in the driver's compartment. I don't know about New York Metro, but the UK Metro, the London Metro, you can't use your mobile phones on the Metro. The internet doesn't work. I'm amazed that the internet works everywhere in Ukraine. It has some of the deepest metros in the world. So in Kiev, even, right down at the bottom of the tunnels, you can use your phones. And this particular train carriage was deep in the tunnels. I'd walked through the tunnels and I was assured that, the electricity had been turned off by the guide I was with. He was like, don't worry, that there's no live rail, you're fine. And we came across this carriage and I just thought, I just like this because she's a young girl. She just wants some privacy. Can you imagine you're living in a train station with your family for weeks, possibly months on end? You just want to get away for a little bit and go on TikTok or whatever she's doing, and life still goes on, and that's her just trying to get her little bit of time away from, I don't know, a screaming younger brother and a mum who's probably telling her to sweep up their corner or whatever, and she's just there on her own.
And that little smile in her face, just enough that one of her friends wrote back, right? I mean, that's what it feels like to me.
And then what you can't see, and it's difficult if still sometimes, is when I came back through the tunnel back to the main platform, everything started to shake. And at first I thought, well, there's no trains. And I realized we were under bombardment. And we were just about to walk out and our guide was just like, no, go back in. They've started shelling. And literally the whole metro was shaking with the shells outside. It's really quite something, And so that's what they're facing, that, one moment it's quiet, you can just go upstairs for some fresh air, and that could be your last moment. It's as simple as that. I mean, and it's still going on now. I mean, they've managed to push the Russians back a bit, but they're still being shelled quite regularly in Kharkiv. You think that's been going on now since the 24th of Feb, and they're still facing that every day. This was the Kharkiv chief of police, Vladimir Timoshko. This was his office. The police headquarters was hit by 2 Russian cruise missiles, and somehow he got out alive. He was in the building when it happened, and this is just a picture of him in what was his office. He just, we're having a talk. He's like, "You've got to come. You've got to, come with us, and let me show you, what they did." And it's quite incredible, really, that I've been in countries that have been at war and everything has unraveled, and all those sort of state apparatus or whatever. And that's one thing that struck me, that in Ukraine, that everything is still running properly. I mean, I know other people that have covered the postal service and stuff. Everything's running, but the police are running. They're still doing their job, and they're taking aid out to people, and they're doing vital work. They may not have been quite as popular before the war broke out, when they're just going around sort of breaking up parties and whatever else. But they've yeah. So after Kharkiv, we went down to Dnipro, and I came across this funeral of this guy called Dmitry Kamenko, and he was killed in Severodonetsk, which some of you may have heard of, which was a city that recently fell to the Russians, right on the front line. He was killed by a sniper. And his family were there, and there was a long line of Ukrainian forces as well, who gave a gun salute and everything, and it was a very somber occasion. But then, whilst that funeral was going on, just further along in that same graveyard was this guy crouched down, Kirill, with his friends Stas and Tanya, and one of their school friends, whose name was Bohdan Karimov. He died fighting in Kharkiv, and they were just there paying their respects. I first noticed the grave before they arrived because it had some Snickers bars on it and an energy drink, which just seemed quite, I was like, oh, what's going on there? And then they turned up, and these are just young people, who only a few months ago would have just been partying and going out, and now they're having to deal with the sort of grief that you just shouldn't be dealing with at such a young age. It's really quite terrible. So he died in Kharkiv, and then as a bit of a juxtaposition, down the road in the main park in Dnipro, this group, who was Daniel and his friends, they just escaped from Kharkiv, and they'd arrived in Dnipro, and they were just like, what the hell, we're just gonna party in the park. And
they're getting ready to play beer pong, right?
Yeah, that's you can see in the corner. And one of them, he flashed up, they're all pretty merry by this point, and he just showed me a picture on his mobile phone of his apartment block, which had just been leveled by Russian artillery. So they've been through it, but we all have to let off some steam sometimes, right? And
Heathcliff, between this photograph and the girl in the train car, the human spirit must go on, right? I mean,
yeah, totally.
In no matter what the situation is, it goes on. I mean, that's why there's a future, right? The future that,
Yeah, totally.
you know what I
And
mean?
I just thought there was, you've got, and there is that juxtaposition also of, there's this young man who died in Kharkiv, and trying to defend these same people, and it's just life. It's the cycle of life, and
Yeah, and we were saying the other night, like the flowers and the arrangements at the grave sites are incredibly beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean, really beautiful. The flowers are just amazing. But that sort of gives you, the way you set that up is actually beautiful. Great idea.
Thank you. So, I mean, it's incredible, really, just quite how important trains are in Ukraine. They're sort of like the arteries of life for the country. That's so important. And at the beginning, people were fleeing, and I was talking about the men having to stay behind. Just is so tough. So this is Sergei saying goodbye to his wife Olga and their children, and really emotional. And I just couldn't think what it must be like, if I had to do the same thing and stay back and watch my family leave like that. And this was at Dnipro train station, and I mean, we've seen a lot of pictures like this, but it's just every one of these pictures is a different family. So I guess even though it's almost, we've kind of seen that picture before, but I try not to think about the pictures and just the people, And every one of these frames is another family, and
it's beautiful that you take their names down. So you
I try to. You don't always, and you try and get on the trains, and then you get a rather sort of surly babushka who's the ticket woman, whatever, who's like, it's leaving in a couple of minutes, and you go around and you try and work, which is difficult because you want natural moments, but when you sort of barge onto a train and you're taking pictures, it's not that natural, but you try and do what you can. This family, I don't have their names, but I just like the way that this mother is motioning for her daughter to come forward, and in the next few frames after that, she's got her arm around her and she's just consoling her. And so I just like that, that look, it's, the look that mother gives her child, come to me, deeply upsetting being uprooted like that. So this is in Zaporizhzhia train station, which is south of Dnipro and very much on the front line now. And you've probably heard about it's one of the biggest nuclear power stations in Europe, the Zaporizhzhia power plant, which has been under Russian control since quite early on during the war, and there's been lots of accusations of shelling recently around the nuclear station, which people are getting quite worried about. So also in Zaporizhzhia was quite a popular place for journalists to go, also because of the refugees from Mariupol. And these were some of the last to come out before they cleared out the Azovstal factory. And, these particular coaches, we'd been waiting for a couple of days, because you think, it's not as simple as these people just getting on a bus and leaving Mariupol. They go through a filtration system where the Russian military literally filter them and decide who they're going to let go. They hold back people and take them prisoner. And, not just the men, sometimes the women too. They then have to go through multiple Russian checkpoints, and you never know. Each checkpoint is a rule unto itself, You might get through one checkpoint, but who's to say the next checkpoint they're going to play ball? So they've got all of those stresses, and in the end, these coaches were delayed by about 24 hours. And I just like this picture because you can see the sense of relief, but the sense of grief in this woman's face as, you know, she's got her hand up to her head, and the children, you know, often they sort of grin at a camera, even in the worst of situations, but these kids are like, you know, his stare. Yeah, they've been through an ordeal, but I think most of us could never quite imagine, really.
And this is all during COVID as well, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
tend
I mean, gosh, it's
we tend
absolutely
to
right
forget
there.
that,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that for them was just like having a cold, right? Who was even thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point, yeah, it sort of ends up slightly lower down the pecking order of priorities. It's really, really, really tough for these people. After this, I went up to Kramatorsk to try and do some stuff with the volunteers for getting people out. This is Yuri. He was in a town called Zurikny, which had fell a couple of days before. And we just bumped into him on the streets in Kramatorsk. I mean, Kramatorsk is quite an important city in the Donbass. And when we got there, it was very eerie. The siren was non-stop. So, you know, often with an air raid siren, you get this kind of pulsating sort of wail, which would pulse in and out. In Kramatorsk, the siren would just be a steady wail for hours at a time. It came to the point where I was wondering if I'd ever not hear that siren. You know, it was just nobody on the streets. It was just really, really quite weird. And we came across Yuri with his cat, who's, I'm not too sure if I've still got his cat. No, Bonia, his cat Bonia.
You have the cat's name too.
Yeah. I'm you know, you must have seen it before. I mean, they love their pets. I've just never come across pet lovers as passionate as Ukrainians. I really haven't. I mean, you know, in England, we're pretty famous for, you know, being a little bit over the top of our pets. I mean, I've locked 2 kittens out of the room actually because they're playing absolute chaos. It's the witching hour in London right now. You can imagine they're bouncing around, knocking everything over. So I've locked them out. But the Ukrainians really do love their animals, and there's other frames where he's weeping, but you know, I just thought he's, you know, there's a certain element of dignity here. You know, he composed himself for this picture. In other frames, he's leaning up against the tree, the cat's on his shoulder, he's just, you know, crying. He's lost everything. All he has is his, you know, beloved Bonia. No, you know, I think he had like a little carrier bag, which you don't see in that shot. But yeah, really had lost everything. Just really quite sad. Then went back up to Kiev, and I've forgotten his name, but the head of the United Nations was visiting, and Putin decided it'd be nice to send him a little message. And I was sitting in a restaurant. I'd managed to find somewhere open. Everything closes at 7, and I had no food. And I walked around and found somewhere that was doing like a little bit of sort of tapasy stuff. I mean, it's amazing what you can find, you know. And I had like a Spanish omelette, you know, and a Coke. And I was just so happy to have that. It was like the best thing I'd eaten in, you know, because we're living on sandwiches a lot, what you can buy in supermarkets and stuff on the road. And to have a sit in and have a Spanish omelette was something quite special. And then the sirens started. And, you know, at the beginning of the war, every time we heard the siren, we'd go into the bomb shelter of the hotel. You know, a few months on, you're not doing that anymore. You can't, you know. At night, if you got up every time the air raid sirens went off, you wouldn't sleep. you can't physically get up 2 or 3 times every night, go down to a shelter for an hour, then go back to bed. You wouldn't be able to operate. You just can't do it. So in the end, you just crash. And I was in this restaurant, the siren goes. There's not many people there, but we just think, oh, okay, yeah, it's just another siren. And then there was just this almighty rumble, And I was just paying my bill, and the waiter was like, oh, it's far from here, And it was getting dark, and I went up the next morning, and everybody's there. I mean, in this frame you can't see all the other journalists, but I think the entire international press corps of Kiev was there at this point. We're pretty much falling over each other. When people were coming out of the buildings, oh look, there's somebody. Everyone rush over, try and get a picture. But this isn't the picture I wanted, but he just, these people were clearing up and trying to move the rubble off the road. And then this guy just walks along with his little satchel and his Apple AirPod things in, dressed for work, with his blazer on, and just walks along like nothing's happened. And I don't know, it just struck a chord with me. And it's not, the composition's terrible and all the rest of it, but I don't know, I just like the fact that he's just getting on with it, just bizarre. And when you think of, in our country, if the full leaves end up on the tracks, nothing works. And here, their city's being hit by cruise missiles, and he's getting on with it, I then, traveled a lot of ground on this trip. I went down to Mykolaiv in the south. So this is the big port city, which is very close to Kherson, which fell very, very quickly to the Russians at the beginning of the war. And in Kherson, there's this sense that there were sort of fifth column columnists, or whatever you call them, fifth column, who let the Russians in, people in the security and the military that were perhaps sympathizers of the Russians. In Kherson, Kherson fell, but in Mykolaiv, they held the Russians back. They pushed them back. But during the fighting, the water was cut off. So you just have this thing where I think things have changed since, but when I was there, people always had empty bottles with them, and these people are just here waiting for a water delivery. This guy's got the buggy, his wife's at home. He's got quite a few. I mean, he must have they 5 liters each. I mean, he's probably got about 60 liters, and I kind of remember him saying that they lived on like the 8th floor or something. So once he's finally got the water, he's going to have to slog that all the way up, and I'm pretty sure he's got 2 babies at home. And I think with the nappy changes and everything else, you need to get through a lot of water,
Sure.
He hasn't got them there. I mean, they're at home, but it's not much fun being in a city without water. I was in Tripoli when in Libya in 2011, when Gaddafi's regime fell, and we had 3 days without water, and things disintegrate pretty quickly when you have no water. It's very, very difficult, and they've been going through it for weeks. So down towards the port, this woman, who's hopefully her name I have as well. Yes, Valentina. So Valentina was with her husband Anatoly, and it was his birthday, and she described, instead they got a gift from Putin, and the apartment up above got hit by a missile strike. I think it was probably because of their proximity to the port. With missiles, it's a bit different in Kharkiv with the artillery. You're just trying to harass and whatever. But I think when you're using missiles, they cost a lot of money. These are high, very expensive pieces of tech. You don't just hit apartment blocks, for no reason at all. I mean, this is my personal opinion. I just don't think they would, spend, tens of thousands of dollars just to hit an apartment block. It's just not, artillery shells are cheap, and they've got warehouses full of the things. But with missiles, I think this was, just unfortunate. But she basically hadn't left, according to her husband, she hadn't left the room for weeks and was just down there. And it was, just really, really sad yet again. A little transistor radio on a shelf, and there was still a little bit of Easter cake in a packet. But what I find fascinating is, I'm in my early 50s and lived through the last years of the Cold War, and I remember the ads on, public information ads on TV about what we should do in case of a nuclear attack and everything. We have no shelters in England. There's nothing like that. But in Ukraine, every building has a shelter, or there's a communal shelter very close by, and all of these blocks have shelters. It's incredible. Just and I think the whole of Eastern Europe's like that.
And these buildings are built so well. They take these rockets on and buildings don't collapse, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing that right above her, a rocket.
Yeah, a lot of damage.
Amazing.
I just thought, time and time again, it's just incredible how prepared. And I just thought, what was our plan in the UK if there was ever a nuclear war? We just didn't have anything apart from maybe the government and the sort of the aristocrats. I think all had somewhere to go, but the rest of us had nowhere.
Always.
So we then went. We were trying to get to this village called Luch, which is about as close to the front line south of Mykolaiv that we were technically allowed to go to, and we went with a local fixer. We left our fixer inside Mykolaiv and went with this local fixer, and it all seemed to be going pretty well. But then on the very last checkpoint, about 2 kilometers from Luch, which I think is about 5K from the front line at that point, we were just told no further, forget it. And we were arguing with them. We were making calls and getting them to speak to somebody back at the press office of the military, and he's just like, I don't care, you're not doing it. So we pulled back 2K to Shevchenkova, which is also getting hit every day, but just not as badly as Luch. And at first there was just nobody around at all. It was very, very quiet. And then we came across Pavel, who bizarrely gave me his full name, but didn't want his face shown. And go figure. But he came out of this building, and it was, a quiet village like so many I've driven through before, but just the occasional house would just be completely demolished by shell fire, and not many people. I think 90% of the population had fled over the last few months, but some people were just wanted to stay. And at first, it was very difficult to find anybody, but they slowly started to come out. And here we have Alexei with his Alsatian, just, all the time we're here, there's the rumble of artillery, just to try and put it into context.
At that checkpoint, was that a Ukrainian checkpoint or a Russian?
Yeah, Ukrainian checkpoint. Yeah. So, and they're just not letting you go to the final village. Yeah.
And what is the motivation for not letting you go through? they don't want you to get hurt, or they don't want you to document? Like what's that piece?
I think it's more that unless you're with a military press officer, they don't want you going anywhere where there's a lot of military personnel.
So more
That
security.
makes sense.
Yeah, security generated.
Yeah, so they don't want journalists just sort of wandering around without an escort. Okay. Which, to be fair, you get a bit of that with when if you're out and you sort of you're out in Iraq and Afghanistan in the old days, they didn't sort of take too kindly to unilaterals, as they would call us, sort of rocking up and trying to take pictures of whatever was going on at the time.
Okay.
So the villagers started to slowly come out, and this is Sergi. They were showing us. They went to show us where a cluster bomb had fell, which you saw a little bit of that in the picture before, and then there was this crater, and this feels like, let me show you this crater, and he just went over and jumped in it and stood there. And he was just so keen to show what the Russians were doing to their village, and it's I don't know. I mean, I assume that's probably like a 155 or something. It's pretty big to make a hole that size. But it was just this thing of, I often find in Ukraine that when you arrive, people are quite cagey. They're a bit suspicious. I'm like, who are you? What are you doing here? I don't really want my picture taken. But as soon as they decide that you're okay, they just become super, super friendly. And he was like becoming a bit like a tour guide, taking us around. One of the cluster bombs fell here, and this fell here, and look at that. Now, this might seem like a weird picture, but like I was saying before, the whole time we were there was the rumble of artillery. And I just love this picture because this is just an old couple, Nadezhda and Nikolai, and they're literally just coming out just to get a little bit of sunshine whilst the shells aren't falling on their village. They're falling on the other villages at the moment. So they're just coming up from their bomb shelter, which I visited, and it's full of pickle jars, and they've got 2 little beds in there, and they spend their whole time there, but they just wanted to come out with their cat, sit on their bench, outside their perfectly manicured house, whilst the, house is a few doors down, whatever. And
the old people don't want to
just trying to keep going,
The old people don't want to live.
No, well, the younger people don't either. I mean, pretty much everyone that's still there were of the mind that, whatever happens, we're not leaving.
Right.
They're gonna stay. Where else are they going to go to? Well, they can,
It's true.
live in a refuge the rest of their lives. I mean, they don't have much.
Yeah.
And what they earn in Ukraine is a lot less than what they'd earn in Poland or Germany or France or the UK or the US, or they're saving. It's and that's the thing. It's difficult to get your head around sometimes. And this is just some of the family who invited us in just to share some food with them at the end. I mean, this Sunday was the day when you celebrate the dead, and they had animals out back. They still, in the back shed, they had a cow and some chickens and stuff, and they were, making all of their own food there. And
Are those little shot glasses?
yeah. Luckily, I wasn't driving. They had homemade vodka, which was delicious. And I was like, look, because they got the bottle out, and they're like, look, I know what happens when a bottle comes out. The tradition is you're meant to finish it. And I was like, look, just so you know, we can't. We can't get into that. We'll just have one. Okay, just one. But of course, then it was, okay, just one more. So we had 2. We had 2 shots each, and that was done.
Mm.
Finally, the last few frames, just back in Kiev towards the end, I hadn't, a lot of my colleagues had been up in Irpin and Bucha in that area where there were just enormous scenes of destruction. And I felt like a bit of a tourist at this point. It had all been done, but before I shipped out, I just really wanted to go and see for myself what was going on. And in Irpin, I mean, Irpin was a wealthy commuter town on the outskirts of Kiev, big houses with driveways, walls, high walls around their homes. A lot of these people had money. And in this block, this was in the basement of a kindergarten, and everything was just covered in this sort of fine mist of charcoal, all of the toys. And this is an artist by the name of Andrea Kovton, and him and some volunteers were planning to turn it into some sort of art installation, which is kind of bizarre, right? But at the same time, really quite interesting. So they were cleaning up. On some of the floors above, there were people. I mean, there was no roof on this building. It had all been, taken off. And the guy on the top floor was adamant that he was going to put a new roof on and rebuild his home. And then you've got these volunteers downstairs, cataloging all of these children's books and toys, and creating an art. And I just thought it was interesting. It's just so much going on, So in the midst of all of this and the grief, there's all this sort of culture going on. This art.
I mean, this is really unbelievable. I mean, this is a beautiful shot. I mean, it's almost like a Hollywood set. The way it's lit, and it's the brown, the soot that's on that. I mean, try to recreate that. I mean, you know what they do here every once in a while? We've had a baseball player in New York. His name is Thurman Munson.
Yeah.
And he was killed in a plane crash. He was driving himself. But what the Yankees, it's the Yankees baseball team, they took his locker and preserved it forever.
Yeah.
Behind glass. And even when they changed stadiums, they brought it over exactly the same. So like this, time just stands still.
Yeah.
And I could see the artist friend of, who's going to build it back, just putting something over that. And here it is.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
And then down the road from here, people don't have any power. They don't have any gas. They're all outside their homes cooking. And Jana was cooking borscht, and I just like this, just as a frame, just showing, I mean, they're still doing this now. I mean, a lot of people still haven't been reconnected. Yeah. People are still outside cooking, and
that's a testament of their spirit, right? Life goes on.
Yeah, totally. And they were pretty good that day. It was just me and our fixer driving around. The next day, the journalist I was working with, Colin, he went back to try and have a talk with them, but they weren't having such a good day when he arrived. I just, the stress of what they're going through is just, like I've said before, it's just so unimaginable. But the whole building is just pockmarked with, and you can see all the bullet holes around the door. Imagine what life has been like there. You've probably all seen the graveyard of cars. I just wanted to do something a bit different with it. This is actually a multiple exposures stitched together, because I always found it's very difficult to sort of see the scale of it. So it's not something I do really, but it's Photoshop's so incredible now that I held my camera, I did a couple of frames, and then sort of walked 5 steps, did a couple of frames, and tried to just stay parallel with it, and then stitch them all together just to show the the scale of it. I mean, a lot of these cars came from the Irpin Bridge, which, you know, Ron's pictures showed that, and Heidi's of the people streaming across that bridge and underneath it, trying to get out when the Russians were advancing. And there were all of those cars around, but, you know, people had died in some of these cars, you know. And I've seen in recent photos, people have now started to paint them with sunflowers and murals and things. A lot of people now go there and have selfies taken with them. A friend of mine bumped into some sort of like weird, kind of like somebody using it as like a movie set backdrop, you know, with fake flames and things. I think it's become a bit of a phenomenon, but yeah, I don't normally shoot panoramics, but I think occasionally there's a picture that kind of deserves to be treated in a different way.
Yeah.
And this is the Irpin Bridge, which, you know, was, I don't know if immortalized is the right word, but it, you know, it was such a scene for a few weeks as the Russians were advancing and they were trying to get people to safety. So they were going in the opposite direction of the way these people are walking now. And they were walking out towards Kiev, you know, which is the other direction. But in this picture, you can see this is Anton Markovich, who's at the board, and he's just writing the name of his grandfather and father that died. So it's like a memorial wall, you know. So people, it's now become, yeah, it's become a memorial. And people go there to visit and to reflect and to contemplate. And yeah, so although at first I thought I'm just going to go and see these places to try and, you know, to see for myself what I felt like I'd missed by going east and south and never being in that area when it was big in the news. You know, at the same time, I think, you know, there are still stories every day, you know. I remember I was talking to a journalist at the very beginning who was just arriving on the border, and I was talking to him, and he was quite young, and I was saying, look, you know, every person in this queue has a story. You know, we've got like 800 people here. There are 800 stories right here, right now. And that's the thing in Ukraine, as you know, the scale of it. This is, you know, sort of unthinkable, really. This war happening in the middle of Europe right now, which could have a profound effect on all of our lives for quite a while to come.
Yeah.
Final image. This is one of the Azov wives, and Natalia and her husband Bogdan was one of the Azov soldiers in the Azov style factory under siege from the Russians. So this was taken on the 7th of May. A few days later, they surrendered. She hadn't, just before I took this picture, she hadn't heard from him for about 2 weeks and feared he'd been dead. And we're in this restaurant interviewing her, talking, and suddenly her phone starts to bleep. And it was him.
Mm.
And so they started chatting. I think it was on Telegram, and they were chatting away. And it was quite emotional. So we had to kind of pause and just leave. It's like, you know, she might never speak to her husband again. So we're just like, okay, you know, do what you need to do. And they were trying, at this point, her and a bunch of other wives were trying to highlight the plight of Azov fighters and trying to get some deal made. I mean, they're still trying to do it now, but recently a whole bunch of them got killed in this prison. You know, they were blown up, and the Russians claimed that the Ukrainians had hit it with a missile, but I think photo evidence proves that it was more likely a bomb inside the building that blew outwards. So it seems quite possible. We don't, you know, they're not allowing anybody in to check, but it does seem plausible that the Russians in fact massacred a lot of those prisoners and tried to put the blame on someone else. But yeah, this is a portrait of Natalia holding this image that her husband had taken with his mobile phone and sent to her of him in a bomb shelter in the Azovstal factory shortly before the surrender.
That's really witnessing a miracle almost, huh? Heathcliff
Yeah.
to be there when that phone rings, that must be unbelievable.
Yeah. You just the look, the grief for her. I mean, I'm hoping he's still alive. I mean, that's the thing in this job. You're living someone else's reality, and then you go home to your own one. But I'm often left thinking, I wonder what happened there. I'm hoping that there'll be some good news will come out of that.
You can only hope and pray.
Yeah. And that's the final frame.
Right, so you can stop sharing, and if anyone has, open up the mics, Jay. If anyone has any questions, comments, now would be the time. But Heathcliff, that was incredible work. Thank you so much for
Thank you. Far too kind, but thank you
for informing us and letting us know what's going on the other side of the world there. And so, what are your plans? Do you plan on going back?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to. It's just as a contract photographer, I'm kind of at the mercy of my photo desk, really. And funnily enough, I think this is the first story like this in quite a while where there's probably 4 or 5 of us who are all quite keen to go. And there was a time when there was only a couple of us, so I'd get a sort of I'd have a lot more options, but there's a sort of rotation thing going on, so I'm hoping it'd be good to get back out in September, maybe, if I can. I mean, that'd be ideal, but I definitely want to be back for the anniversary. I realistically can't imagine this is going to be over by February 24th.
Is that right?
But I would like to go back this year, sooner than later, preferably. And you end up getting invested in a story. I know some of my friends have managed to cut off, and they were like, when they got home, they turned off all of their devices. I haven't been able to do that.
When does winter hit there for them?
Do you know what? I really couldn't tell you when winter really hits. In a lot of Europe, it's sort of November time, but I remember, I mean, it got down to like -10 in March, this year. So
wow,
it was still, snowing quite heavily in February, but yeah, I really don't know when it's going to hit, but it's going to be brutal for people when you're in these bombed out buildings without gas, electricity, and I mean, we're all complaining about our fuel bills going up and all the rest of it, but I've got all my windows, I mean, I count myself lucky.
Yeah. Ellen really put it all into context, the humanity in your photographs and your words. She it's beautiful. Yeah. You brought us there with real texture.
Well, I try to, I don't know, sometimes it's, like I said before, it's great to talk about pictures because often there's something that it can be difficult sometimes to take a picture that really tells the story of what's going on. There are times when, it's like, there was a time when my paper experimented a lot more with video. And there are times now when I think, gosh, with sound, that is so different and there are times when the noises and the atmosphere around you just can't capture it in a still. And I love stills, and it's, my first love, but so it's good to be able to sort of talk. I think, having that thing of talking about the images as well and describing the scene around it. And I know I've shown too many pictures tonight. Less is more, but sometimes I felt that it was good to just bundle a couple together because it builds a picture in a different way. They
were all in context. I mean, it's great to see that. It really is. I mean, and especially, I mean, I love the camouflage where the kids are doing all that, and the girl in the train and, all that stuff that, we normally we normally don't get to see. What is your website, Heathcliff?
Well, my it's just heathcliffo'malley.com. It's
Joe.
yeah, it's photo shelter based, but yeah, it's just heathcliffo'malley.com, and I'm on Instagram. My main one is Heathcliff OM, I think, for abbreviated. Yeah, so Heathcliff OM.
But your presentation was great in that context and bringing it all together and bringing us different sides of of the journey that you went on emotionally. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do.
Thank you. It's a privilege to share it with you. So thank you very much.
And as I always say, you have a standing offer when you want to come back and you have more work, different work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Just ring me up. I mean, we'd love to have you again. I mean,
hopefully I'll be able to build on this and keep moving forward with the story.
Great. And the other thing is be safe, Heathcliff. Be safe for your two kids.
Yeah,
right?
will do.
Thank you. That's the most important thing. We can't forget that. So if anyone has any other questions or comments, now would be the time. But Heathcliff, we thank you very, very much.
No, pleasure.
Great job.
Frank, Joel Simpson would like to know what if Heathcliff has a website.
I just asked him. Yes, he does. And Joel,
so heathcliffomalley.com.
Yeah, that'll be easy to find. Okay, great. Thank you, Heathcliff.
Without the apostrophe, I assume.
Yeah.
No apostrophe in there. No, just heathcliffomalley.com. Yeah, www.heathcliffomalley.com.
Yeah. Everybody, thank you, and we'll see everyone tomorrow night. Like, we have Heidi Levine, and then we have a special piano performance by Lillian Tomko, a beautiful piece. It's called Medley, actually, that will send us off tomorrow night. So if you can tune in, we'd love to see you. And again, Heathcliff, thank you very, very much.
No, thank you.
Great job.
Take care.